And I think we are live. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel discussion on entities and SEO. My name is Dominik. I've been in SEO since around 12 years, more from a content marketing, content strategy perspective. I'm based in Vienna, Austria, and I'm your host for this discussion today. And with me are today Viola, Bastian, Dixon, and Jason. And may I ask every one of you for a very short introduction, maybe like around 30 seconds. And maybe we'll start with Dixon.
Hi, guys, and thanks very much, Dominik. I'm Dixon Jones. I'm probably best known as marketing director of Majestic over the years. I started in SEO in 1999, so I'm well old. But now I'm the CEO of a company called inlinks.net, which is it's an SEO tool that's built around entities and natural language processing programs.
Cool, thank you so much. And let's go to Viola next.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. Good morning. Looking forward to the panel. I'm Viola. I'm based in Berlin. I run a digital marketing agency called Flow SEO, where we help digital businesses, mainly software companies, to rank on Google. So it's a very content marketing heavy SEO approach.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Bastian.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm Bastian, also based in Berlin, funny enough. So almost neighbors to Viola. I run an agency called Peak Ace. We do basically full service performance marketing, strong focus on SEO with roughly 22, 23 kind of different languages in-house. So we kind of try to approach that from a very kind of international angle, if you so will.
Cool. Thank you so much. And last but not least, Jason.
Thank you very much. I'm Jason Barnard. I'm the brand SERP guy, self-proclaimed brand SERP guy. I'm obsessed by what appears when your audience searches your brand name or your personal name. And that leads me on to knowledge panels and getting knowledge panels, which is what I'm talking about later on, just after this session. I'm based in Paris. I've got a SaaS platform that I'm just building out now. It's in beta, where we help you to optimize your brand SERP and trigger knowledge panels and manage knowledge panels. And I get very boring about it if you let me, so please don't.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. And also welcome to the audience, of course. I see we are like 46 people right now. If you could put in the chat, just like if you're like into SEO or if you're like a newbie, maybe from 1 to 5. 5 is an expert and 1 is an absolute beginner, so that we also know a little bit more about you. And I would like to start the discussion with a quick definition or explanation of what entities mean in SEO, in the SEO context, so that we also like get on the same page for everyone in the audience. So maybe, Dixon, do you want to start like with a short explanation or definition of entities?
Yeah. So for me, we'll let Bastian pull my definition of entities apart afterwards, but because he's technically much more advanced. But for me, an entity is an online encyclopedia entry. So it's the idea of turning a concept, an idea, a name of a person, a name of a place, a thing, anything from a guitar to a concept, an emotion, anything that would have an encyclopedia entry in a normal encyclopedia. Imagine that just stripped down and put into a semi sort of structured format. So you've got a little spreadsheet of all the things that that thing is about. If something has an encyclopedia or should have an encyclopedia entry, then I would say that is a really good way for a marketing person to see what an entity is. That's my definition of an entity.
Cool.
It's an online, it's a semi-structured encyclopedia.
Straight to the point. Anyone wants to add something to that?
Yeah, I love the idea of encyclopedia entry. I think that's a brilliant way of putting it. Yeah. And then the knowledge graph is what Google then builds to understand that it's an encyclopedia. And I would say it's a machine readable encyclopedia using it as a reference book, as opposed to trying to look for keywords, which is what we've traditionally done in SEO. Is actually Google just looks everything up and figures out what different things are. And I think it's important to point out that Google's in the process of building that up, that we're just at the beginning. And it's incredibly exciting. Bastian, sorry, I cut in there.
No, no worries, no worries. I just actually meant to say there's not much to kind of pull apart, I would say. I just like more kind of
I'm very glad about that. I'm very glad about that.
There we go.
If there's one person, guys, that I respect in his ability to understand code better than me, it's Bastian. So, you know.
No pressure there. No, what I meant to add, and this is actually, I think, maybe also an interesting shift and also important to understand for the audience, is that I think the one big thing that comes with that definition is kind of a shift away from a URL-based system to like more an identifier-based system. I think this is what is really interesting on this. So, you know, back in the days, I mean, Dixon has been doing that for a long time. I kind of also started end of the 90s. Like we were all like obsessed, you know, about URLs and how URLs are kind of interconnected and interlinked with each other, right? And I think, I mean, we still have that as an identifier, but I think if you look at what Jason was just saying, like if you look at different elements that one can be the knowledge graph panel, or, you know, within the knowledge graph panel, even like the different things that Google is kind of pulling into the SERP, they are not necessarily kind of tied to a URL anymore. In fact, most of them are not, which is, I think, a quite interesting shift, and brings also a whole bunch of different like challenges with it, actually.
Yeah. That's a very good point. I remember headlines like Google wants to remove URLs from browsers. So this would be like,
I mean, to be fair, in fact, they did to an extent, right? If you look into what happened in the search results, first, like we're now almost only seeing breadcrumbs and no URLs. I mean, except for some very specific searches, but like you would only see breadcrumbs. So I think that was the start of that. Secondarily, I think now obviously with Chrome, like at least in default, like we had some back and forth, right? But like right now, only showing the kind of host name. It's just a matter of time. I mean, I'm not really buying this whole story of, you know, people don't understand it. I think even like the average person is capable of typing in at least a domain. So like entirely taking it away, I'm not sure yet. But I mean, there were certain tests, especially in the States, some in Europe, mostly the States, where you had snippets. There were just literally no URLs, no breadcrumbs, nothing on mobile shown anymore. So I guess we're going to see much more coming on that front. But I think relying just on the URL itself is not a good idea.
Yeah, agree.
I don't like the idea of them taking away the URLs. I must admit, you know, I see apps like WhatsApp and things where it's getting increasingly difficult to copy the URL and then put it into a different system. And I think that's a mistake for a WhatsApp. I mean, I try not to use WhatsApp, so there we go. You know, so I've lost my customer.
Oops. Yeah, true.
So I see also like some beginners in the audience, with like Maria with a 2 and Paula with a 3, for example. So maybe let's go into like why we think that entities matter for SEO, and what's about entities in general. So why should we care about it? Viola, maybe you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah, I think, I mean, something that the guys already said before is like step one, I think, is the idea that using the keyword as the holy grail for everything that we do and everything that we're optimizing is not working anymore. And obviously started with the idea of like optimize for things, not strings, and the fact that Google is getting smarter and smarter at understanding concepts, understanding people, and that like the way I like to think about it when I think about entities and about keywords and how do they match, is more this idea is like Google and their need to give the best answer to a search query, and us pointing us towards satisfying search intent makes us think more holistically. And if we still want to think about keywords, then it's maybe a question of what are all the keywords in that cluster that belong on this page? What are all the related concepts that I need to touch upon in order to make sure that my content is relevant? And so this is, I think, the transformation that already started by now, probably like 10 years ago, but that is like accelerated now. As well.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Slawski was saying, talking about Sergey Brin, I think it was, who started the whole Google Books thing all the way back in the day. And one of their initial kind of programs was to say, let's take a book and bring these authors together and start looking at books. And that was the beginning, and that was right at the start. So what I've kind of strikes me is that they've always wanted to do this. They just didn't have the technology. And I did a presentation, or I got a presentation at Google a few years ago, and it was about the evolution of the technology to the current technology we have. And basically, they built the top technology in order to be able to do this. So they've been moving towards it, whether it's big data, whether it's BigQuery or whatever that's called. I'm not very good at technical stuff. Bastian can probably tell me all about that. And it's all been building towards this, and I'm kind of excited because I get this impression that we're getting there. We're almost there. And Google Maps. I mean, if you look at Google Maps, it's a stunning. I mean, I'm sure we've got a lot to talk about there, but that's basically Google getting to grips with entities. And Bill Slawski, once again, I keep quoting him, said that was just a proof of concept. And I love that term because it's such a massive undertaking and it's so phenomenally powerful and successful. And it was just a proof of concept for what's about to come. Brilliant.
I think another reason for entities being important is that increasingly, as you go about your daily sort of surfing or your daily interaction with the Borg, with Google, that you're less and less typing anything in at all. Actually, you're going around and it's being predicted for you. So whether you're using OK Google or you've got an Android phone and you've got Discover and things pop up that you didn't know, or whether you're looking at pictures which don't have words to define them, and we just talked about the fact that you're not using URLs quite as much before, and they're trying to so this idea. Thinking in terms of things, not strings, is more than just a phrase. It's much closer to the way in which we understand concepts and ideas. We understand the concept of Nike much better than we understand Nike.com, the website. The concept of Nike is not just the website. It's the shoes, it's the brand, it's a little tick and all the other bits and pieces. So I should have gone for Adidas there. Bad move. There we go. So I think that's why it's important. And on top of that, there's a scale issue. But Google has invested billions now into this approach, and it ain't going away. I think for the late teens, Google was the two ideas of a page-based index and a entity-based index were competing with each other, and they still are competing. So they've got this meritocracy of machine concepts on in Google all the time, and those two ideas were really fighting it out inside Google politically as well as at the engineering level, and I think that the will to make entities the dominant approach has now got there with a change of leadership at the top and just evolution of the engineers at Google. So whether it was there at the start or not, I don't think it's going away. It's definitely not going away, and I think it's pretty much past the point of no return now.
Brilliant. So maybe let's switch the perspective a bit, and like for the SEOs in the audience, what can we do that Google recognizes or entities, or is it enough to provide like structured data, like in terms of schema.org, or how can we optimize for entities? Maybe like from a more hands-on perspective, what do you think?
I think structured data is incredibly important, but it isn't enough. You can present your information in structured data and it really does help the machine. You can look at structured data and think, oh, it's really complicated. It's actually just reproducing what's in your page in the language that Google speaks natively. It's a machine language. It's its native language. If you look at it that way, you're basically just...
I like that definition. Yeah.
Thank you very much. How charming of you, Dixon. But then you also need to be clear within your content. Your content needs to reproduce that, and you need to write clearly. And I think what we fail to realize is if you start thinking about, will the machine understand this? And that needs to be relatively simple structure. It also means if you're adapting your structure, the structure of your sentences to try to get the machine to understand, your sentences were probably too complicated for people too. So it isn't writing for machines. It's actually becoming conscious of the fact as human beings, we've got these immense we've got jumps of imagination, ideas and concepts that we understand like that. Machines don't. And I think we also failed to realize that a lot of people don't necessarily understand it. And a lot of people are much more comfortable. I'm much more comfortable with a simple kind of structure of a sentence. When I get to the end, I'm not thinking, what did this start with? And I find myself when I write and I correct myself is I have to reorder the sentence to make it so that when you get to the end, it is the logical end of the sentence, as opposed to, some clever literary trick, which does have its place, but that probably isn't on a web page where you're trying to sell something to somebody.
Viola?
I think, Jason, you're probably also going to speak to obviously appearing in the knowledge panel, etc. But the way, Dixon and I have been joking before, is like using the term entities roughly as a placeholder for like topics. And so coming back to that idea of encyclopedia is sometimes, especially in the software space, a lot of people recommend people like, you should become a media company, your software company should become a media company. But the way I think about it more is like you really want to become a resource library. And so and you want to make it easy both for Google and users to find stuff. And so taking an approach in which we know where concepts live on our website, and maybe there's like a pillar page where we clearly, introduce and define a term, and there's like a universe of like contextually related topics and pages that go with this. So I think the way I think about entities in a way that is useful for what we do in our content strategy is really this pushing this idea is like, not only does Google go in this direction, but how can we mirror this idea of resource library on our websites and make it really well sorted and really well structured?
I think sorry, go on, Bastian.
No, I just meant to actually ask an additional question, and maybe you can even kind of incorporate in your answer. But like, what I'm wondering is like when you talk about structured data, right, and specifically schema, but also, it doesn't matter which type of schema. Is it like inline, or is it JSON LD, or whatever, which is really, yes, it's machine readable, but it's a messy format, to be honest. Just because it kind of bloats up your markup if you do it inline, which is not great from various perspectives. You can't there's not many centralized services to kind of do it externally as an external JSON LD in a sense. So I'm like wondering, yes, structured data in a way to train a machine, granted. I don't think it's going to be needed a couple of years' time because Google's just going to be smart enough. So I think we just, again, training some of the machines to understand things. My favorite example is usually a zip code, because the zip code is not a zip code, is not a zip code, because it looks different everywhere. So we just give the context of that number being a zip code, right? So I think this is what it is. But like what I'm wondering is, and I think, so Jason, you said it as well, like structured data is an add-on. Like, for a new domain, let's take a very hands-on example here. Like, it doesn't matter if you put on structured data or not, you're probably still not going to be an entity, right? Like, that can't be all, because if it's a new domain, Google doesn't trust you. It's the same as we did with links years and years ago. Like, it doesn't matter what I do on page. I need other signals. And like, maybe you guys can share some examples of what you're seeing works as maybe even stronger signals than structured data, but like in combination with that. So that, I think that's what I'm kind of curious about.
I think the structured data. You're right, absolutely right. That theoretically, structured data is a patch for a machine to try and learn because it can't understand what's on the page. And I think Jason's also right that writing simpler sentences makes it easier for a machine to understand. So we run a very old index overall content called the Flesch-Kincaid algorithm, which basically says what age American school leaver could understand this content, basically, is the concept of the algorithm. But it works really well for understanding, if something's simple for a human to understand, it's simple for a machine to understand. The downside of this is that it dumbs down the internet. So it's actually making humans more stupid. There's a philosophical argument for saying, so I think that's a real problem. So I have this problem that I absolutely agree that the way to get more visitors is to write in a simpler language, because the machines will understand it better and they'll know when to return it. But also, if you're going to explain new innovative concepts that search engines never seen before, just the things that only humans can understand, with Google's actually moving away from being able to understand that concept. So until a plethora of people start talking about it and start explaining it, then Google's not going to connect the dots. I see artists talking in the chat about neural networks. So and I think that to to your point, Bastian, one of the ways in which we can get those extra signals, obviously external links still very, very important, but just internal linking can make a huge difference to helping Google understand where the authority is for a concept within the concept of your domain, of your website, your pages. And I think that's very, very important because although, as Viola says, the perfect world is to have a page that's an authority on this topic, a page that's authority on this topic, being able to tie that topic specifically back to a defined entity. We do it to a Wikipedia article is great. But then you're going to be talking about a bunch of semantically close related entities on that page anyway. And if they don't link through to the authority of that content, then it's hard for a machine or a neural network to understand where the point of authority is for any particular concept within your content.
Yeah, well, I'd like to bounce back with three really quick points. I'll try to be really quick. One is that I think we need to bear in mind that it's still a bot that's crawling the web, so the links are phenomenally important and will always be phenomenally important because that's how Google functions, that's how the web functions. Secondly, I don't think that writing clearly is necessarily dumbing everything down. Being clear is just good writing, and if we're smart, we can still be intelligent and communicate complex ideas. We just need to be clear, and I think that's a good thing for humankind. And the third one is what Bastian was saying about, schema markup. Yes, it's structuring for a machine and we're training that machine. The most important thing is having that, what I'm calling an entity home. You're talking about the authoritative page about an entity or a topic or a thing or a person or a brand. What John Mueller is saying is the reconciliation page. But his point, reconciliation, is incredibly important because without that corroborative information that is consistent across the web, Google will never grasp it. Like a child, you can't just tell it something and expect it to believe you. You have to have supporting evidence, and it has to hear it from multiple sources that it trusts.
Can I ask a question for Jason, or do you want to move on, Dominik?
Go ahead.
So, Jason, this reconciliation page, what makes us think that Google's going to treat our reconciliation page with any more authority than a Wikipedia page or any other, or a Wikidata URL? Yeah,
well, Google's looking for the information from the horse's mouth. It wants to know what you want to communicate, and that's the reconciliation page, your entity home. I think entity home is probably better because it's saying this is where the entity lives. It's the official home of the entity. Come and have a look at this information, Google. Here it is, schema markup, great, clear writing that states who I am, what I do, and what my business is, who my audience is. Then I point you to all the other resources that confirm it. Wikipedia is obviously very authoritative, but that was training wheels for Google, and it's trying to let go of them. And the idea that Wikipedia, and that's actually a point Rand Fishkin made, is I don't want to give control of my brand message to Wikipedians. They don't know. He uses the wonderful example of saying, if you ask them, what did Captain Kirk wear in the 15th episode of the 25th series of Star Trek, whatever shirt he was wearing, they will get it every time. But if you ask them who founded Moz, they get it wrong. He had his Wikipedia page deleted because he asked to have it deleted. He had to fight to get it deleted because it was wrong and because he couldn't get them to correct it. Yeah. And that's the coming back to the machine is you need to make sure that you communicate clearly that you're the authoritative source about yourself, because once the machine starts to get it wrong, it's really difficult to reel it back.
And you know what, Jason, when I read about this, I was thinking actually a lot about local SEO and how you set it up. And then you basically put your name, address, and phone number in all the directories. And the more consistent you can be, the better your chance for success, which is essentially what you also said earlier, right? It was their training ground. And for me, it seems very similar. I'm not sure if you agree.
No, exactly. The NAPS concept, name, address, phone number, consistent across the web, is something that is phenomenally important. And for Google My Business, it no longer needs it, apparently, in terms of a ranking signal at least, but it will always need it in terms of understanding your entity once the machine gets free reign. So the NAPS concept is always going to be there for us in terms of controlling how Google understands who we are, what we do, and who our audience is. And talking about Discover, which you talked about earlier, Viola, who we are, what we do, and who our audience is becomes phenomenally important, because Google's saying this person has this need, they don't yet know it as Google, Google. I'm calling you Google, Dixon. That's a compliment. Or it's an insult.
Is it
depending
now?
on how, yes.
I'd argue that.
And it's looking at what it's that predictive thing. Star Trek, again, is initially they said, we want Google to be able to predict what you need and provide what you need before you even know it, like the machine in Star Trek. And that's what Discover is pushing towards. And that idea is you don't yet know what it is you want. We're going to push it to you. And in order to do that, A, they have to understand what it is the user wants or is going to want. But they have to understand what it is you offer, who you are, what your topics are, and what you can offer in order to even think about offering you. So being understood by Google in this encyclopedia sense is the single most phenomenally important thing in the entire digital marketing googly world at the moment. And it's not just Google. All these machines are building internal knowledge graphs where they're understanding the world and trying to use this to leverage their content and push their platforms. I'm sorry, I'll shut up now.
So would you argue that...
It's good.
That's good. So would you argue that consistent, clear communication is more important than any structured data or anything else, right?
They go hand in hand.
If you've got your entity home and you've got clear text that with semantic triples, subject, verb, object, really clearly written, and you link out to all these corroborative sources, as Bastian says, you don't actually need the structured data. The structured data simply reiterates what you're already saying in a page in a way that the machine can natively understand. So it's a crutch, a supporting piece of helpful junk, whatever you would call it.
Maybe to make that a bit clearer, I was like, I'm not saying I don't like structured data, right? Not at all. Like, I think there's a huge benefit to, like, we've been like playing a lot with stuff in like more niche areas. Like, we have a huge client in the automotive industry, for example. And I mean, most people don't realize, but there's for a lot of verticals, there is specific structured data markup, like for to stick with that example, like you can mark up like makes and models and like, horsepowers of a car and whatnot. And, what's funny though is like, I mean, of course it's never guaranteed, but what you see oftentimes is that, at some point Google decides to kind of take on a niche and make that knowledge graph a bit nicer in a way. And then all of a sudden they start pulling that stuff. So kind of if you have this first mover advantage, oftentimes you would see like your snippet in the knowledge graph panel to be, much more comprehensive, much more in depth. So again, I'm not saying don't use structured data. However, I think with the caveat that like there's oftentimes information that, especially when you work with like very large sites, that is kind of exclusive to them. So in that case, I would also be like, do I really want that to be surfaced on Google, especially if they have potentially models where you need the traffic on your site? Because I think Dixon said it earlier, like the issue is a bit like, all of those nice and shiny looking elements, they essentially just trigger another internal Google search. Do I care? Well, maybe to an extent, but I want the traffic still, right? So I think it's a bit of this yes and no situation. And I know now people will probably jump and say, look, if that's information that can be surfaced just for informational queries, you don't deserve the traffic. Well, in an ideal world, that's maybe true, but like my clients pay me to get them traffic, right? So at the end of the day, I think it's a fine line to walk.
Yeah, that is the crux of the challenge for SEOs as an industry. Our job is right now knowledge graph, but the end point of that is destruction for the SEOs, because it means that all the information is sitting on Google's servers and not is not sitting on your client's website anymore. So so that is a huge problem for the traffic-based model, really, because everything that you're doing to improve SEO right now is leading to a cul-de-sac for us as an industry.
And if you think that concept a bit further, it gets even worse, right? Like if you look at like the crawling and indexing APIs, so at some point, like if they finally manage to scale this properly and not call it, jobs indexing API, which is, well, a bit of a nonsense anyways, but like, let's say they get there and they just don't need to crawl because you push the info. So that's the second thing that's going to happen. So also significant reduction in terms of crawling and maybe visiting the site in general. And then I think at the end of the day, you just become this fulfillment center, right? Because everything else essentially can is going to happen in the search results. I mean, I don't think it's going to stop. Like there's no way for Google. They're too greedy, to be honest, to stop at only informational query. Like there's going to be transactional queries that they will be serving, through third-party API providers, where just the transaction happens in in one of the boxes on the search results, and you're like, okay, this is the done order. Please ship it out because I don't want to do the logistics, and that is really going to be a problem. Like, at least for business models.
I mean, they absolutely see their two main competitors in the world as Facebook, or maybe Apple, maybe Facebook, Apple, Bing, maybe, and Amazon. Amazon is a big competitor for them. So the idea that they're not trying to find another way without the public spotting it until it's way too late to be an Amazon is naive. So I think they definitely are heading. They've still got a big eye on that. That Google store kind of. Just buy it from here. It's easy.
I mean, if you look at Instagram, that now allows you to shop in the feed, right? It's also a similar idea, right? You used to be just watching, and now you can buy within the Instagram storefronts right away. And
it's a great example, actually.
Google could do that too, right? Like just have the checkout right there.
Do you want us to log in?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
They're already starting down that road. If you look in the US right now, there are knowledge panels for products on product searches with all the reviews. You can click and opens up a little window. That's going to roll out. And basically, Google is saying you can do all your research on Google now. And it is, as you say, Dixon and Bastian, a very small step for them to say, well, you might as well just buy now in this window that we've opened up for you. But all of these platforms, and I think kind of, it's not just Google, they're all becoming increasingly walled gardens. They've all got these knowledge graphs. They're all trying to push this content on their users. They're all trying to sell something. They're all becoming walled gardens. Be scared.
Yeah. Fair enough. That's very true, actually.
Sorry, I've just ruined the party.
That's a good statement for a 10 a.m. session, I have to say. Well done.
I mean, I've
got this huge philosophical thing going on in my head, but I'm gonna save it for a book, and that's all right.
I'm not sure, because if that's true, I think the question is now, like, what would we do, right? So I think if that's where we're at.
From my perspective, I was an SEO. I used to be a blue dog, and I came in the cartoon, and we had this phenomenally successful website with the links and the keywords and all that old stuff from the 90s, and moved into SEO, became an SEO through the fact the blue dog thing fell apart, the cartoon fell apart, and I became an SEO. And then over the last few years, I feel I've become a digital marketer, and now I've become a marketer. And for me, the segue in my career, at least, has been I'm leaving SEO behind, as it were, and moving much more towards being a marketer and thinking in terms of how we're marketing to people. And I'm quite enjoying it, to be honest. Less tech stuff, more writing and thinking about how people perceive stuff. I'm having a good time. On my tiny little level, of course. Sorry, I'm not.
Yeah. This is the T-shaped market that everyone is talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think kind of segue. That is the thing. I mean, talking philosophically about the world in general is gone are the days when you have one job for life.
Yeah.
And you need to learn to segue into new jobs as the world evolves, and the world is evolving pretty quickly. My choice right now is saying, SEO is great. SEO still has a place. SEO continues to be important, but it's one aspect of marketing rather than the whole shebang, which it was when I was a blue dog.
I think that was always the case, though. I think that even before entities became a thing, it was if you could build your SEO practices to bring in all of the organization's other channels and get all of those other channels to touch on, at least understand and have a hat tip to SEO, then you'd get links out of that. You'd get communication, you get social media kind of help, and all of those things will help. And SEO is very easily something that complements all the other marketing channels, or should do. But of course, we're now back with entities is a very, very, it's not new. I mean, they bought Freebase or MetaWeb, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago? I don't know. It's quite a long time ago, which is their first foray into entities. So it's been there for quite a long time, but it's only really in the last 18 months, 24 months, I'd say, that entities have become more prominent. We've realized just how far they've gone, and that we've got to change our ways if we're going to want to moving forward. So I think that's what's changed really, is just the zeitgeist has got to a certain precipice, and so now we're talking SEO concepts again, because we're back to trying to understand the nitty gritty of what this new approach is really. But eventually, you're right, it's marketing. It's always marketing.
So can I ask a question? I mean, it's probably to like Viola as well as Dixon, because I assume you both have that challenge somewhat equally, right? I mean, you both mentioned like we kind of moved away from like keyword-ish types of structures towards more like the entity situation. I feel that looking at what kind of we are dealing with, that people don't really understand the difference and the concept behind it. So what is a keyword versus why is it different? I mean, I think we touched on a couple of things, but like from a very practical hands-on perspective, I mean, I guess Viola, what I'm curious to understand is like how you guys approaching things like, I mean, you produce a lot of content, as you said, like content campaigning, and you build out those pieces. How did your approach change? I'm wondering, like when you go into like building out, I don't know, keyword strategies, how do you map that to topics? Maybe that's something that the audience is also interested about, because I think that's a very hands-on a thing where people like struggle. And then maybe Dixon has a thought on like how you could do that from a more technical, systematic perspective. I think that would be quite interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I consider myself more like a content marketer, SEO. So I normally, when I think about building out a website and building out a content strategy, I usually think about three main components. And one of them is kind of like your mission, your vision, your brand voice, what do you stand for? And I think this is also like, if we think about what is Google becoming with Discover and this type of stuff, it's a little bit more like the other social media platforms that we know, right? It's a little bit more scrolling, being served something like we have on Facebook or Instagram, but some people still stand out and some people still get a loyal following. So I think this idea of what do you stand for is a little bit disregarded by the SEOs sometimes, but I think there's something we can learn from other social platforms. And then still like search behavior, what do people search for? And then the third thing is kind of like what the algorithm wants. And so in my day-to-day, I actually work a lot with tools that are similar to the one that Dixon has. So whether you use I haven't really played with inlinks, but it seems like it could fit very well into my workflow. But if you use something like Surfer or Page Optimizer Pro or Keyword Cupid, what they're basically trying to do, they're trying to help you with your keyword mapping. And instead of thinking like one keyword, one page, they're trying to think, okay, what's the whole universe of potentially like hundreds of keywords that go here, and then build your content calendar kind of like from there. So I think in terms of like practical application, that's maybe the most tangible shift is really thinking page and keyword clusters, and they can be quite massive, right? Because obviously you can have 400 keywords on page one and 1,500 keywords ranking on a page. And then really being kind of like observing how page one is changing. When does it show the same stuff? When does it show different stuff? Because that gives an idea when Google maybe thinks that one entity stops and a new one starts, as if page one is starting to change. And then the other practical the topic that I try to think about a lot is this idea of context, right? So if I think about kitchen, then fridge, pan, stove, right? That's not the same entity, the same search intent, the same keyword, but it kind of needs to be there in order to strengthen the relevance for kitchen overall. So along these lines, I'm thinking a lot. But in terms of like future and kind of like the end of SEO, when now are we ever going to get a click again, etc., I'm really thinking more brand, thinking more visibility, thinking touch points. And I think we might have even talked about this before, Bastian. This idea is like if we all have the same tools, the same website template, the same make your word count, 1,700 for this query, use this, and like, how do you make sure your article is different? And if you have a query, I don't know, what is digital communication? And you write the exact same article that everyone else already written about what is digital communication, they're not going to remember you. They might like the article, but they're not going to remember you, let alone buy from you. And so I think this idea of like thought leadership, controversy of like industry truism where it's like appropriate, so that people actually build an emotional connection to you once they see some of your stuff. This is stuff I think about.
And
Great
I think
answer. Yeah, cool.
we've tried to, and we're trying to really, the data wise, the tool wise, we're trying to feed that approach. So we're starting at the other end of building knowledge graphs. So we're saying, right, okay, let's say it can still start with the keyword. Let's say I want to rank #1 for Tower Bridge. Tower Bridge is a famous bridge on the Thames for anybody in Lithuania, so it's fine. You've still got that concept there. Now the interesting thing there is that how do you work out the difference between a tower, a bridge, and Tower Bridge? Those are three very, very different things, and a tower and bridge only becomes one entity when used together. Really, a tower with a bridge is not Tower Bridge, even though it may be a bridge with a tower. So what we're doing then is building knowledge graphs around a phrase. So what we're doing is we're going and having a look at all of the content that's great for Tower Bridge. We're running a natural language processing algorithm to build a database of all the topics, all the entities. And for us, an entity is a Wikipedia URL. If it hasn't got a Wikipedia, we'll move on from that one at some point. But ultimately, that's our definition of a thing. So we can picture those. We can sit there and say, right, the concept of Tower Bridge is mentioned in all 10 is mentioned in all 10 competitors. The concept of a bridge is only mentioned in 7, and the concept of a tower is only mentioned in 4. That gives us 4 or 5 different entities, and then we've got the Thames, and then we've got London, and then we've got cars, and then we've got bridge or a lift up bridge, so whatever the word is for that. So you've got all those concepts coming around, and you put them in a database, and you say, look, you've got to be about these. And we know that Tower Bridge is a thing because it's being used together, and it's a concept, and the way that it's being talked about. Tower may also be important, bridge may also be important, but then you've got concepts and ideas that you need to talk about. And then because we've written the rest of the knowledge graph, we know what's semantically close. We've categorized all that stuff as well. So if you're an engineering company, then the topics that you choose out of that list would be different to the ones if you're a tourism company, or if you're a boating company that needs to go through Tower Bridge and need to find the times at which the bridge is raised. So these are very different reasons for talking about Tower Bridge. And so we categorize all of those topics as well. And that helps the writer to then become that expert in that context, and do better by seeing also the semantically related topics within any category. So we're trying to feed that need for becoming an expert, or that page of content becoming the expert for that particular topic. And it's working quite well, I think. So
And just to bounce back on something that you said, Viola, about basically getting the word out there, branding, becoming a brand, being a recognized brand, is all pushing towards branded search and brand search, which is my obsession. And we're moving towards that. As if you actually want to sell to somebody, increasingly you need to get people to actually be bottom of funnel. You need to bring them to the bottom of the funnel, not necessarily through Google, through all these channels. So they're searching your brand name. And when they do search your brand name, presumably that's the moment you can then convert them. And I think branded search, I mean, John Mueller was saying, this year we need to be looking at pool search, and he's called what he says is pool search is in fact branded search. And I think if that's going to be one of the keys in the years moving forward.
So to sum up, it's about building like a good brand experience, being customer centric, and it's all about the context, right?
Yeah. Being relevant to the user, brilliant.
And I think the endpoint to your logic there, Jason, is interesting, because potentially Google is moving towards not just brand SERPs, but a knowledge panel for every concept. So actually, the concept of Tower Bridge will have, and it already has got its own knowledge panel. Obviously, I would assume, but the concept of walking will have its own knowledge panel. So basically, every topic then becomes your concept of a brand SERPs. So your brand then needs a close affinity with So
they become entity SERPs.
Entity SERPs. Yeah. So the end point of this game is really no web pages being shown whatsoever, because the Borg has assimilated all the world's knowledge, which is
kind of how it looks like,
openly their mission. So
so if you weren't
what a
scared
wonderful
before,
ending.
now you are. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, then we iterate and we do something new, right? So I think the game doesn't end there.
No.
Never. It's an infinite game. Yeah. Yeah, cool. I think we're running out of time. So thank you so much for being a part of this panel. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and maybe we can continue it on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you're online at. And yeah, let's stay connected and keep the discussion going. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you, Dominik.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Guys.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ooh.
3, 2, 1. I didn't know there was a
And-
countdown.